The new Pearl Jam album Dark Matter comes out this week, so I thought what better time than now to rank all their albums on another edition of Rock Albums Ranked.
Jeremy spoken class today. Don't call me daughter, can't find a better man.
Hey everybody, it's Nick here with you. Welcome back to the channel. Pearl Jam's 12th studio album Dark Matter comes out this Friday, so it's time to rank all of their albums from least favorite to favorite. And I've been a Pearl Jam fan for a very, very long time, pretty much since they hit the scene back in 1991, and they've been a huge part of me growing up as a music fan and a musician. And I've been with them through every era of the band, from the good to the bad and everything in between, so this was a fun endeavor to rank all of their studio albums from least favorite to favorite. So without further ado, here's my Pearl Jam rock albums ranked. In at number 11, we have Gigaton. I'm really sorry to put the most recent Pearl Jam record at the bottom of the list, but I'm sorry, this record just doesn't work for me. It came out in 2020 during the pandemic, and I don't really remember liking it very much on first listen. It didn't really make much of an impression on me, so I went back to listen to it again. And it still really did nothing for me. The songwriting for me is weak, the production is bland, and the band just sound like they're on autopilot the whole time. I came away from listening to Gigaton the first time and on this most recent re-listen not really being able to remember any of the songs, not being able to hum any of the songs after listening, which is a problem for any record, but in particular for a Pearl Jam record when these guys know how to craft a great song. The band is trying to write good songs, I think, on here, but it's just not happening. Even when they do something different like Super Blood Wolf Moon or Dance of the Clairvoyants, the instrumental side of things is okay. The band sounds great. Of course they're going to sound great. They're Pearl Jam. But the melodies just fall flat despite Eddie Vedder still being one of the best vocalists and lyricists of all time. 7 years on after Lightning Bolt, it took them 7 years to put out a follow-up to Lightning Bolt. It just seemed like the band lost their edge a little bit and just weren't really feeling it. I think the reason why the newer songs that are coming out on this new record that we've heard already, like Dark Matter and Running, the reason they stood out to me so much is because they have so much punch to them, you know, they have so much attitude, and it sounds like the band are really rocking again. And you know what? I really have high hopes for this new album, Dark Matter, and I'm hoping that they'll be able to recapture some of the magic that they lost on Gigaton. But if the new album ends up being Gigaton Part 2, I'm going to be pretty disappointed.
So save your predictions, burn your assumptions. Love is friction, ripe for comfort.
In at number 10 on my Pearl Jam rock albums ranked, we have Riot Act. Unfortunately for me, Riot Act features some of Pearl Jam's weakest tracks, and in terms of songwriting, is one of their weakest efforts. After they made their stadium rock resurgence on Yield in 1998, the band again made kind of a dip songwriting and quality-wise on Binaural and Riot Act. Kind of similar to Gigaton, they seem to lack a little bit of that edge when it comes to the songwriting on this record. There are some cool tracks on here, don't get me wrong. I like tracks like You Are, Matt Cameron. Shout out to you on that one because he wrote that track and it's one of the best Pearl Jam songs.
Love is a tower, and you're the key.
On that record, I like Bush Leaguer. That was their kind of weird little track about George W. Bush. But then even the key tracks, the songs that are supposed to be those anchor tracks for the record are weak to me. Can't Keep is not a great opener for a Pearl Jam record. Save You is not one of their better rockers, even though they're trying to do that on that track. Love Boat Captain is great because it introduces Boom Gaspar as the keyboard player for Pearl Jam. But you know what? This is a 15-song album, and for 15 songs, the majority of them, for me, are pretty weak. Thankfully, the band rebounded on subsequent albums, but Riot Act definitely not one of their best efforts.
Leading me higher when you let me in.
And at number 9, we have Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt was a little bit more of a creative peak for the band when it came out in 2013. Mind Your Manners has a Do the Evolution kind of vibe to it, which I really like, that punk rock vibe that we hadn't really heard from Pearl Jam in a little while. Sirens is a great Pearl Jam ballad, and I love the album tracks on here as well. I love the title track, Lightning Bolt, and I love Let the Records Play. That is another great song on this album. Unfortunately, though, it was signaling a time for when Pearl Jam were going to significantly slow down with their releases. We got Backspacer in 2009, we got Lightning Bolt in 2013, and then we had to wait 7 whole years until Gigaton. So the band has definitely slowed down in terms of their songwriting and recording. Definitely not their touring, because these guys are on the road all the time. We know that Pearl Jam are road hogs, but they just kind of slowed down a little bit with their songwriting for Lightning Bolt, and I'm hoping that they can recapture some of that momentum with this new album, Dark Matter. But this was a solid effort. For my money, 2013's Lightning Bolt was the last great, cool Pearl Jam record, and I'm hoping that Dark Matter can recapture some of that magic.
Hear the sirens, hear the sirens.
In at number 8 on my Pearl Jam rock albums ranked, we have Backspacer. So Pearl Jam continued the momentum and kind of the songwriting buzz that they got on that 2006 self-titled record, and they continued that into 2009's Backspacer. This album is really cool because it features some more modern rock, snappy production that was more reminiscent of other modern rock bands of the time, especially on tracks like The Fixer. I really love that. Also features some of the best mid-era Pearl Jam singles, truly great songs like Amongst the Waves and Just Breathe. This album has some really great hooks on it as well. A lot of the songs on this record could live in the great pantheon of awesome Pearl Jam songs, and the band sounds great as ever. Eddie Vedder, obviously, on lead vocals, sounding great. Jeff Ament on bass. You know, I never really rated him very highly as a bass player over the years, but after re-listening to some of these Pearl Jam albums, especially in my headphones, I've come to appreciate Jeff Ament and his bass on a lot of these tracks. It's not really super pronounced on a lot of Pearl Jam songs, but he sounds great. Mike McCready, obviously one of the best lead guitarists of our time. Stone Gossard backing him up, some great rhythm guitar playing and songwriting, and some great lead playing as well. And then Matt Cameron, obviously, on drums. These guys are one of the best ensembles ever to play, and they sound great on this record and pretty much all their records. Hard to believe this record came out back in 2009. It makes me feel old, but it's still a classic record.
Riding high amongst the waves.
In at number 7 on my Pearl Jam rock albums ranked, we have Binaural. I think with Binaural is one of those Pearl Jam records that I really wanted to like more than I actually liked it. The band returned to form with their anthemic rock roots on the previous album, Yield, which is one of their best albums, and then they followed up with Binaural, which really has some great songs on it and a killer album cover, but maybe isn't as strong a follow-up to Yield as we were hoping for. After writing big radio hits on Yield like Given to Fly and Wish List, the band went experimental again, kind of going back in the no-code direction, releasing Nothing As It Seems as the first single, which is a cool song, but it's far from being a radio hit. And I remember getting caught up in the hype of Binaural in the spring of 2000. I was in high school. I remember buying the record, still a really great album cover, but buying the Nothing As It Seems single when I was at a mall in New York City, of all places, on a choir trip to New York City. And I remember buying the Nothing As It Seems single and thinking, like, this is okay, but it's definitely not a huge radio hit.
It's nothing as it seems. The little that he needs is home.
Of course, this is the first album to feature Matt Cameron on drums, who is one of the best to ever do it. He brought such energy and passion to the drums on Pearl Jam tracks, and a band that really has had a lot of great drummers. Matt Cameron, in my opinion, is the best. And I know the title Binaural is a reference to the recording techniques that they utilized during the making of the record, but it doesn't really make the songs themselves any better. I do love the first half of the record, though, when you have songs like Breaker Fall, God's Dice, then you have other songs like Of the Girl and Insignificance. It has some great songs on it. It's just not really a strong album all the way through, and the band's attempt to spread out the songwriting love throughout the rest of the band leads to kind of a lopsided track list. A decent record, but unfocused in hindsight. In at number 6 on my rock albums ranked for Pearl Jam, we have their self-titled record from 2006. To me, this self-titled record from 2006 is a return to form for Pearl Jam. We've already talked about Binaural and Riot Act. They are okay at best, but this one seemed to have a little bit more pep in its step, a little bit of a rebound with the quality of the songwriting. Songs like Life Wasted, Worldwide Suicide, both great rock tracks. Parachutes is a beautiful track, but by far my favorite track on this record is Unemployable. I love the chorus on that song.
I'm scared alive, here to die, scared alive, here to die, scared alive.
I also love the guitar riffs on that track. It's one of my favorite, I guess, mid-era Pearl Jam songs. It's great. And Pearl Jam sounded somewhat refreshed after a few duller records, and I feel like bands who have been around a long time go through these ebbs and flows, and the band is going through that again right now, in my opinion. Gigaton was not a great record for me, so I'm hoping that Dark Matter is another peak as opposed to a valley for Pearl Jam. And at number 5, we have Vitalogy. Pearl Jam, along with other bands of their era, rebelled against the commercial success that they experienced. Well, maybe rebelled is a bad word to use, but they struggled with it. It wasn't something that was easy for them, along with other bands from the 90s like Nirvana. They were going through some tough times as a band, but they were also going to battle with Ticketmaster over ticket prices. Even with all their success, there were hurdles for Pearl Jam, and this album reflects that. And the rock songs on this record are not your typical rock radio tracks. You have Last Exit, Spin the Black Circle, Corduroid, Not For You, which was a huge single for the band, was definitely a fuck you for a lot of people. It was very Neil Young in his song This Note's For You. But there were some really beautiful songs on Vitalogy as well. You had Nothing Man and Better Man, the two man songs on Vitalogy, which continue to show that Pearl Jam can write some really beautiful music. But then there's some bona fide weirdness on this album. You have songs like Satan's Bed, you have Bugs, you have Hey Foxy, I can't even pronounce the rest of that title, aka Stupid Mop. It gets very strange in spots. It's still a great record, but it's definitely not one of my favorites. And who could forget the Digipack that Vitalogy came in back in 1994? This was the start of when Pearl Jam really started putting a lot of care into the packaging of their records. Even if you got the CD version of the album, you got it in a really cool package that made it worth picking up.
She lies and says she's in love with him. Can't find a better man. She dreams in color, she dreams in red. Can't find a better man. Can't find a better man. Can't find a better man.
And at number 4, my Pearl Jam rock albums ranked, we have No Code. This is an odd album in Pearl Jam's discography. It's definitely their They Don't Give a Crap album. Coming off the heels of the weird but awesome Vitalogy, the band continued down the experimental road they were already on. Pearl Jam definitely rebelling against the early 90s success that they experienced, just like other bands like Nirvana were doing the same thing. But even more so on No Code, they threw convention out the window and made an album that is moody, downbeat, and very Neil Young, which is not surprising because they also made the Mirror Ball and Merkin Ball releases with Neil Young around the same time. But even though it got a mixed reception when it came out back in 1996, I believe, it's always been one of my favorite Pearl Jam records and one of the Pearl Jam records that I've connected to the most. And I always just loved the packaging for No Code. Like I said at the time with Vitalogy and No Code, and really from their subsequent albums, they always put so much work and effort. Like, check this out, so much work and effort into the packaging of their records. And I know this is a CD, but it almost feels like a little vinyl, and it's always been one of the favorites in my collection since I picked it up in the mid-90s. I love the subtle intro of Sometimes into rockers like Hail Hail and Habit, but then you have album tracks like Who You Are, Off He Goes, In My Tree. Eddie's voice on this album is incredible, it's vulnerable, and then who could forget my favorite song from this record, one of my favorite Pearl Jam songs ever, Smile.
Don't it make you smile? Don't it make you smile? When the sun don't shine, it don't shine at all. Don't it make you smile?
Like I said, it's an odd duck in the Pearl Jam discography, but for me, it's one of their best.
I miss you already. I miss you always.
And at number 3, we have 10. I know. A lot of people would expect 10 to be at the top of the list. It's really hard to argue with 10 as a Pearl Jam album, a debut album, and then one of the biggest and best albums of the 90s. It covers so many bases of things that I love about Pearl Jam, but it's still not my favorite Pearl Jam record. I have such fond memories of listening to this album as a kid because I have an older sister. She's 4 years older than me. So in 1991, when Pearl Jam and Nirvana, Soundgarden, and bands like that hit the scene, she had all of their albums on CD. So when she would go out with her friends, I would sneak into her room and listen to her albums on her CD player. She was the only person in the house who had a CD player. And I just remember sitting around listening to this album, listening to a lot of the great albums of the time. And then I remember the singles and videos being everywhere here in Canada on Much Music. You had songs like Even Flow, Alive, Black, Why Go, and of course, the unforgettable video for Jeremy, which still haunts me to this day. I even had an airband with my neighbors from across the street. I used to have this little keyboard, and my neighbors from across the street would come over and play on my porch, and I would use my little keyboard to lip sync to Jeremy like I had my own band.
Jeremy spoke in class today.
So obviously 10 is one of the best albums ever made. Pearl Jam came out of the gate with 10 fully formed as a band and songwriters. Obviously they had been in bands before Pearl Jam, but this was really where everything came together. But even though I have very fond memories of the time of listening to 10 and that whole era, it's still not my favorite Pearl Jam record. But it's also the most overplayed Pearl Jam record. I used to work in FM rock radio and we used to play songs from this record on repeat. So Even Flow, Jeremy, Alive, they're great songs, but do we ever really need to hear them again? In at number 2 on my Pearl Jam rock albums ranked, we have Verses. After the success of 10, Pearl Jam didn't take the easy way out and just try to reproduce the sound of that record. They took another direction on Verses, which is still one of the best Pearl Jam albums ever. The band still rocked and kicked ass on this record, but the songs were a little less conventional in the approach, even though it's still a huge rock radio record. But this album is so propulsive and explosive right from the first track, Go. It's balls to the wall rock. You have Glorified G, which is one of my favorite Pearl Jam tracks for sure, but then you got Animal, Dissident, and also some great acoustic driven moments on tracks like Daughter and Elderly Woman. It took Pearl Jam to another level. Just like listening to 10, I remember sitting around and listening to Verses. I was 10 years old when this album came out, and it's definitely just, I have such fond memories of listening to this album. It still kicks ass, and that's why it's near the top of the list.
Don't call me daughter, not fit to the picture kept will remind me.
In at number 1 on my Pearl Jam rock albums ranked, we have Yield. After the mixed response of Vitalogy and No Code, Pearl Jam went back to stadium rock with fantastic results. I love the weird side of Pearl Jam, but also their anthemic rock side, and this album definitely scratches that itch. I don't know whether it was label pressure or the band wanting to go back to their hard rock roots, but it certainly worked on this album. From what I've read, the band was more on the same page on this record, with each member bringing in completed songs as opposed to relying on Eddie Vedder to finish them. And the results are awesome. Yield is the best Pearl Jam album since Verses, in my opinion. From the first ferocious notes of Brain of J into Faithful, No Way, Given to Fly, and later tracks like Wish List and Do the Evolution, which might be their heaviest song ever, Pilot and Hiding. It's one of the strongest Pearl Jam track lists, and to me, it's them at their very best. The thing about Yield is that it balances their arena rock side with their weirder inclinations. And it's also the last album to feature the great Jack Irons on the drums, who is definitely up there with Matt Cameron as one of Pearl Jam's best drummers. Even though I love the more experimental side of Pearl Jam on No Code and Vitalogy, they went back to their stadium arena rock roots on Yield. They wrote some really great songs that are among the pantheon of great Pearl Jam songs, and that's why Yield is number 1 on my Pearl Jam rock albums ranked.
I wish I was a neutron bomb. Once I could go on. I wish I was a sacrifice, somehow still lived on. I wish I was a sentimental ornament you hung on.
And that is it, guys. That is my rock albums ranked for Pearl Jam. Let me know what your favorite Pearl Jam albums are in the comments below. Get ready for that new album, Dark Matter, coming out this week. I'll definitely be doing a rock album review for the new album here on the channel. Until then, make sure to like this video. I'd appreciate that. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos here on the Nick Chino channel. Make sure to follow me on social media everywhere you can find me at Nick Chino Music, and you can check out my band as well at foolsunion.com. But I'll see you guys again for another video here on the channel. Until then, rock on, everybody.